Actually, while we're waiting for it to start.
Okay, it's really great to be in Ithaca. In a lot of ways, I grew up in Western New York and Rochester. In a lot of ways, my work in resilience started in this town. Very fortunate to have an older mentor be able to take me to the Ithaca, to the Cornell climbing wall, where I started to rock climb, which was like the first half of my life. And if the last half is permaculture and resilience, the first half was certainly rock climbing. And that started right up the hill here in a lot of ways. So it's neat to be back in Ithaca. It feels really good. Great to see so much interest too. And we're watching you guys from all over too, seeing some great things happen around resilience and community. So it's really neat. I thank you for your interest. And so without further ado, I'll just go through what we're working on mainly at my own farm and homestead in Vermont. Yeah, if we can turn off the front ones, that'd be awesome. And the lessons that we're learning at our farm and homestead. Thanks a lot. And how they carry over to other sites. I want to root it in principles, and there's about 10 principles I want to hit on as I go through the talk, which are drawn from about 75 principles, which are in the book that is coming out through Chelsea Green Publishing, which you may have seen flyers going around for, which are the most important principles and strategies we've kind of identified in the last 10 years of working on resilience and really abundance promotion, which is what we're focused on, our 10 acres. And they're probably part of many more, maybe hundreds of principles and strategies that we've noticed while we've been there. But I just want to draw on the most important ones. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? Yeah? Okay, excellent. So the work that I'm speaking about, we see kind of happening as part of a larger movement, transition you may call it, kind of shift towards resiliency and responding to current, past, and potential future conditions. And the way we see our kind of role in that is in developing a vigorous and resilient integrated assembly of living and built systems, what we call the site, the homestead, the farm. And we see that as part of a larger culture, which you see here at the bottom, connected really through our surpluses and our yields. We kind of see that as our connection to the world around us, at least our beneficial connections. So those yields are all of the things you typically think of, and some of the things that are maybe less tangible, like knowledge. And obviously we use inputs to generate those yields. The goal really is to generate more yields and more value in those yields over time while requiring less inputs over time. That's kind of the overarching parameter in which we're working. So just a little bit of context there. I want to hit a little bit on what we're responding to. I know we're all very, almost too acutely aware of some of the challenges, but I think it's important to bring it to the fore so it's on our mind while we think about the solutions. I want to spend as little time as necessary there, but it's important to bring it to the fore. Basically, some people call it peak everything. I kind of like that term. I kind of don't, because it's not quite accurate in that everything is peaking. Of course, peak oil is a factual kind of inevitable situation of any resource that we're using up a lot more quickly than the earth makes it. And obviously, since oil is at the basis of our current cultural approach, that drives everything else. But really, toxicity and health implications to global toxicity and the economic and social challenges and inevitable places that we're going as the kind of impossible resource relationships that we're dependent upon play themselves out. That's what we're responding to. And through solutions like working on enhancing our water systems, our soil systems, our food systems, increasingly our health systems, that's becoming a real focus, keeping ourselves warm, fuel, wood, and heating, keeping ourselves fed, staple foods, again, dealing with the health aspects of our situation, and then how this all fits into multiple generations, because really what we're working in is beyond our own lifetime. So if we can oversimplify, history of our current situation in 3 thumbnails, it might be this, right? We, for the most part, most human beings lived close to our resources. Unless you were, in the elite, ultra-wealthy class, you knew mostly where most of your food came from, where your water came from. you had a connection with those resources. Often you were directly involved in them. To the automobile, World War II, the automobile, and everything else that emerged from post-World War II technology, the suburbs. What's next, right? We think this situation that's lasted really a mere 50 to 60 years can go on forever. One thing we know is that it can't. What's next is something that's a little harder to agree around, right? We just can't create basically a society of consumers with a society of producers with a society of consumers, right? It doesn't work. Where are the producers? Well, for the last 50 years, we've exported those producers, and they're far away now. But we're realizing that the cost of getting our livelihood from far away is something we just can't continue to bear, really. The kind of war economy that is can only last for so long. We'll see. Maybe, unfortunately, it might last a lot longer. I sure hope it doesn't. We'll run out of continents, essentially, but it could last, a very long period of time. Anyone know where this is? Yeah, the tar sands, right? Which underlay a good chunk of this continent, right? And this scale is, just to point out, right? That's a huge dually truck, right there. So, there's a lot of this material, and this is the second part of the oil age, the part that's really going to leave a mark, the real destructive part. I like to think of the first part of the oil age as the easy, cheap, green, eco part of the oil age, right? It was already liquid, and we just had to drill down and get it. And now we have to squeeze the oil literally from rock using other materials like coal, maybe even nuclear, to extract this liquid oil, because it's liquid fuel that we need to live the way we live today. And for China to live the way they want to live, which is the way we've lived for 50 years, right? So, you start turning continents into this, and challenges start coming to the fore very quickly. And it's not just oil, right? As you're all too aware of here, it's also about gas. Hopefully there's not really that much gas in the ground, and it's just a big hoax and bubble for a bunch of people to get wealthy on. But whether it is or isn't, barring a 180-degree shift politically, at the national level at least, and at most state levels, we will, frack out all of the gas that's there, unless, it comes down to really physically stopping these endeavors, which, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But, our track record is we tend to get everything that's there that our economy depends on, our current economy. So, if we don't change direction, we'll get where we're headed. This is all in the context of climate, which is the overarching parameter, right? Essentially, a fifth event in 400,000 years that we're looking at from a climate perspective. We already know what this is doing. I used to, when I started showing these slides 5 years ago, I was like, well, this is what's going to happen, or 6, 7 years ago. And now, climate's changed idea. This is already happening. We're already really looking back at 5 years of where I live from Zone 4 being Zone 5. I really live in Zone 5 now. The maps always said Zone 4. So everything's moving north, climate-wise, including all the pathogens and the pests that go along with certain climates. So it's a challenge, but it's also a solution, right? We have to look at the solution part of it and give that most of our energy, I think. Again, if we don't change course, where are we headed? What should we plan for? If we need to be at 350, great. Need is a tough word to use because we actually may be here. Do we throw in the towel just because we get there? One day we're at 900 parts per million. Well, Bill McKibben said we're toast if we get to 900 parts per million. So, time to go party, right? Let's have a plan A and plan B. Where are we going? We're not going, here. It's just not the direction we're headed in. We're headed in the opposite direction as fast as humanly possible. So what does that mean? What are our backup plans? It starts becoming about resiliency completely. The idea of sustainability really goes out the window. I think it really already went out the window, right? Because what are we trying to sustain? I don't know. Maybe someone here has a situation they want to sustain. In their personal life, that might be likely. But, ecologically, economically, socially, there's not a lot of situations that are worthwhile sustaining today. We need enhancement, right? Regeneration seems to be the necessary focus. So, where are we, right? Just as a context, we're there. We don't need to agree politically or religiously about much to know you just can't hang out in this spot for too long. It's the part you can't spend much time at. So again, it's all about solutions. How do we turn what appears to be, according to all indices, major disaster unfolding into the most major solution unfolding we've ever seen? And that's what we're trying to work on in my own life. So in order to do that, how do we find these solutions? We've tended to look globally, at least for the last 5 years, in a more focused way around the world. Where do we see systems functioning well? I've certainly learned personally to realize that, we're very recent arrivals to this country in terms of our land use patterns. These are really new land use patterns. In a lot of parts of the world, there's very old land use patterns. There's parts of the world people have farmed for literally thousands of years, made it work. So our systems haven't been tested, but fortunately there's many parts of the world, our climate analogous areas, which is if what we call home is generally in the Northeast, this is similar zone 4, 3, 4, 5, 6 throughout the world. And it's not a line of latitude, which people often cite. There's the Gulf Stream current and other global air and water flows that make it like this. So that's important to keep in mind. Look along this line and think of the cultural solutions you may know of or may want to look into more to learn what systems really have worked. So in asking the question, well, what does work here? What's worked elsewhere? What is this place? We realize that we're incredibly resilient tending this place, the northeastern United States, right? We live in a place that because of our seasons and our dense seasonality, our continental climate, the forest mulches itself every year. And a place like this, which is a Class 4 road, where I live in Vermont, they call Class 4 roads the ones that are lightly traveled and not maintained much. What happens to a road like that that's literally for the cars if it's abandoned for more than a few years? What's going on right here? Yeah, it turns back into forest pretty quickly. And that's incredible. That's an incredible fact of existence in this part of the world, because it's not like that in most of the world. If you just cut down all the trees and don't replant anything, do this, right? Do this. This is for mid-central Vermont in the 1800s, our timber rush. This is what happens. They grow right back even on top of rock, because we have an incredibly resilient, incredibly non-brittle climate. So we have very even moisture distribution. So if we can't figure out a way to be highly resilient, like a model resiliency system to the globe here, good luck in most of the world, right? Because this is what happens in most of the world when you cut down all the trees, or even some of the trees, really. You make a desert. Desertification and deforestation are the same thing. We're much luckier than that. This is a very high tolerance landscape, and that's unfortunate in one respect, that we can keep abusing it with bare soil agriculture, especially over and over again. I'm amazed to see corn grow every year 10 feet tall on the same land that's being abused every year, left bare all winter, washing away, pumped full of chemicals every year, and the corn will actually grow fast every year. It won't grow forever that way, but it can grow for 50 years that way, 100 years maybe. So a lot of soil we're mining out. So you look at most of the world where agriculture, this whole idea of growing plants like that emerged. What's there now? We made it into a desert, right? I remember learning about the Fertile Crescent in 8th grade and hearing about this Fertile Crescent and seeing all these photos, and I'm like, it doesn't look very fertile to me. Right? Where's the fertility? I see one green area, right, the delta of the Nile, which is all the soil and water from the mountains where there are still forests in Central Africa. But this is what happened from wheat agriculture in pretty short order. Though it was 10,000 years ago when we started this, it didn't take 10,000 years to turn the breadbasket of the world, the seat of civilization, into a desert. It happened more quickly than that. But again, it's easy to forget. If we look around, we see agriculture like this. It's the same type of agriculture. There's no difference. Our climate is just easier here than it is in much of the world, right? We should really call these things soil compaction machines, because that's what they are. I mean, I guess if you loaded it up with rocks and made the tires a little narrower, you could compact the soil a little more tightly than you can with this method. But that does a pretty good job of doing it, right? So we're trying our hardest to beat the resiliency out of this place. But we're fortunate. The tolerances are high. I want to talk about water systems here for a couple minutes because that's the backdrop of resiliency. Is in terms of land use, is how we relate to water or don't relate to water. So walking up my road where I live on a little dirt road one day about noon. This is how the ditch looked next to where I was walking, and we got about half an inch of rain during this walk, roughly. And 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, I turn around, come back, and the same ditch looks like this. So what's going on? And there's a very bad magical moment happening right here, right? You can see the loss of civilizations actually going on in this, the difference between this and this. Soil's washing away, right? Soil material that took literally thousands of years, been forming since the last ice age, up on the hills, is now going out to the road ditch. It's on the road ditch. It's going to Mad River, and then out to Lake Champlain, and it cannot be reclaimed, really. And some of it makes it out to the ocean. Right? So this is the conveyor belting of value from the mountains to the oceans. Our work in resiliency and land use is always trying to do the opposite. We're trying to get the rain and the weather systems, everything we can of value to kind of reverse that entropy, that constant working, that mass wastage, as geologists would call it. Right, reversing this system. So it's easier today to look at and see what brittleness or non-resiliency looks like. That's why I want to start there, so we can understand what resiliency actually looks like. This is in Tropical Storm Irene, which I know hit here as well. In Vermont, it really wreaked havoc. This is a small stream normally. And this is what happened. We got a factor of 100 in cubic feet a second of water. Went from about 80 CFS, this is at the Mad River, up to, went over 20,000. All right, so this is what the Mad River looked like. Dump trucks, really thousands of dump truck loads a second of soil going out to the ocean from the hills. This is what was happening on our farm. And none of this was actually leaving the farm until the last part of the storm. And I was amazed. I went down to the bottom of the valley and I was like, this is really horrendous what's happening. We are just losing right now. And I was amazed back up at the farm to see these clear water flows while this was happening in our valley. Our town was hit pretty bad, kind of the worst half of what was going on. All the soil washing out to Lake Champlain. And yet up on our farm, the sheep weren't happy about the whole situation, but this pond is totally clear, and it never clouded up even the slightest bit from the whole storm. And I was amazed. I figured it would cloud up a little bit. We'd move a little soil around, but we'd catch it. We have ponds and paddies all over and swales, and we're catching the water. But it never even got cloudy. We never even started to move soil around. It really blew me away because it made me realize all of these slow it, spread it, sink it water features that permaculturists talk about that we've been implementing. I finally got to see how they really work under stress, in a testing type of situation. And I'll point this out right here, going on down in the Mad River. At the same time up at our farm. This is our bottom pond.
Is getting
right? So this
hundreds
is
of gallons
little,
a minute right now.
I call it a check pond at the bottom of our 10 acres. It's only full in big rain events.
Irene,
most of the time it's half empty.
And there's no silt in it.
And I was down here within the same hour as the shot on the left, seeing this lack of soil moving around, and actually just groundwater recharge happening.
Of gallons
this water you're seeing right here
on this landscape
made it into the river, but it made it
in the
over
last
weeks
12 hours
after the storm left.
We're not moving any soil.
Okay, so
whatsoever.
Why am I talking about all this water? We thought the talk was supposed to be all food and cool permaculture stuff, right? It's the backdrop. And all of these systems that I want to look at here for a minute, and while they're so successful and so sophisticated and have worked for so long, they work as they have because of their relationship to water. All right, so here's a great example. This is in the north tip of the southern island of New Zealand, and I was traveling all around New Zealand seeing landscapes like this, oversheeped, overgrazed, two-dimensional agriculture. And then we passed this amazing commercial farm one day, looked like this. And it turns out this is a highly profitable farm growing dozens of crops. The hedgerows are commercial crops, as well as the hops and kiwis and berries and larger fruits growing within these hedgerows. And everything is improving the water that flows into it from these two-dimensional systems, right? We've got we've got plant systems going across the contour, along the contour. So water and wind, erosive forces, are slowed, spread out, and from a water perspective, sunk in this photo, right? Water traveling downhill through this farm has to do what? It's either evaporated, it's either forced into the ground, or brought into plants, right? So it's food for the system. It's not running off. There's another system. It just looks like a natural forest, but this is actually a planted nuttery. It's not something we plant in this lifetime. They don't look like this in one lifetime. These are, intergenerational systems. But here's a system with protection from above in the canopy, protection down low, no tillage necessary, no bare soil necessary. And it's resilient not just to flood because of those aspects I just mentioned, but to drought too, because it's a deep rooting system that's holding moisture in. The canopy is humidifying a system like that, and it actually draws moisture out of the air. As we know, forests make rain. They actually make rain. They harvest water in massive quantities and cause rain to happen. And then we look at actually tillage-based or intensive annual systems. What do they look like around the world? Are there any annual systems? Because it's easy to just really, when you look into it historically, think annual agriculture, civilization collapse. Right? That's kind of, they go together, right? What do these things have in common, in the two columns? But there have been examples of annual agriculture that have worked for thousands of years. Check out King's book called Farmers of 40 Centuries if you're interested in this. And if they're in hillside places, sloping lands, this is what they look like. And it's really amazing to make this connection. At least for me personally, I've known about these systems, seen photos of these systems for a long time, but until we started working with these systems on our own farm, I didn't quite realize what was really happening here. This is all about slowing, spreading, and sinking water. It's all about keeping soil and water up in the mountains and on the hills where it belongs and not letting it rush down to be forever lost, almost forever lost, into the lakes and oceans. All right. So I've seen these systems for a long time, always kind of never thinking, well, we could just make these systems where I live. They were always in Asia for the most part, right? In tropical places, places like this. This is great, right? But obviously that's not like where we live here. This is real tropical. This is Indonesia. Look at those slopes. That's like 150% grades. It's been farmed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Beyond impressive. And then I saw this photo maybe about 5 years ago, or a photo like it, and I was like, wow, that could be Vermont. That could be the northeastern United States. I've never seen these terraces in a cold climate, like full-on deep snows. And I started looking around a little more and seeing that northern Japan has endeavored in these systems, and parts of Korea as well as parts of northern China, which are very much analogous to our climate here. So over time, we've been moving in this direction without really intending to do so. And in the last few years, realizing that it, I guess, shouldn't be so much of a surprise that our landscape, which is our farm here, is starting to look like these systems, at least in part, that exist in other parts of the world. So I've been starting to call it Jamont, right? Kind of Japan and Vermont crossed. It's not like I have any specific connection to Japan. I don't know if I was Japanese maybe in a past life, but there's just all of these clues that are there more than maybe most other places in northern Japan especially, and some parts of Scandinavia and northern Europe that seem to make a lot of sense. And kind of in a very organic way, our landscape is moving in this direction. So here you see, looking west, we're on 10 acres, mostly west-facing is our land. And the first principle I'll mention here is resilience equaling diversity times redundancy times connectivity times manageability. I always, for quite a while, thought of the first part, right? Diversity and redundancy. Those two things going together are what begets resiliency. But living through these systems and working on these systems and realizing they can actually overshoot your capacity to manage them, I started to realize these last two parts, and also the connectivity piece. I want to get into about 10 principles, as I mentioned. I won't read them all off to you. All of these and more are in the book, and you can spend time with them if you're interested. And some of them aren't new, to my knowledge. Some are already around in the permaculture literature, and many are just ones we've come across. I want to show you some examples of them, what they look like, on this farm. And I'll try to make this available online so you don't have to try to write it all down. So on the water piece, this is really what's happening over the whole farm, is what we're starting to realize that we've been doing for a handful of years now, is fertigating the entire landscape, is fertilizing and irrigating the slope that we live on at the same time. And that really comes through simply capturing water, spreading it out, and using the water to move fertility from where it's in excess to where it's lacking, right? Spreading pulses, which is another primary principle. And the rice is a system that makes this very visible, because rice is a grain, it needs a lot of fertility, and it needs a lot of water. And so very quickly you start to realize, well, I might as well, let's say, take some of the manure out of the barn that's built up in the winter, the sheep being there, put it in a burlap bag, make manure tea in a little pool, and then siphon that water, gravity feed it downhill. If I'm going to water the rice already, I might as well fertilize it. So that fertigation starts to become this process. And so this kind of situation is happening all over the farm now in at least 3 other areas where we have a big pond which collects acres of water off roofs and off of surface flow. And then we bring that water into little pools that we call fertigation pools, where we allow the ducks into. We'll be getting geese this year. We also do that burlap bag manure tea type of thing. And then, or use human urine as well to supplement it in the growing season. And then we use gravity, no pumps involved, to get all of that watering done into the paddies, to bring water and fertility. And the results of this has been phenomenal. And the rice growth indicates it, but we also now are starting to realize that we can use this fertigation for our vegetables, for our fruit trees, for our berry swales, for everything. And it's been quite powerful. And this is a system that doesn't depend on any moving parts. There's no pumps needed, no valves really. You can use valves, but you don't need to. And this is a system that's run purely on gravity. And people have made these systems without the polytubing, for thousands of years, just using small hand-dug trenches. So in essence, what's happening on the farm is the water flow naturally, quote-unquote naturally, when we got there, doing this type of situation, going about 1,600 feet from the top of the property to the bottom, losing about 150 feet of grade, 200 feet maybe of elevation, running straight down to something like this, right? That's really the core difference with what's happening. In a 5-second, what are you really doing with water? This is the easy explanation of it. Where water runs, make it walk, right? So now 1,600 feet that a water droplet had to travel to get across the property before we started doing all of these earthwork features, swales, ponds, and paddies. That same water droplet will have to travel over a mile now. And if we have anything to say about it after the spring, it'll have to travel like 2 miles, because we keep making swales every year. And actually, the neat thing is, a lot of that water never even gets to the bottom of the property. Most of it does not. It's infiltrated into the aquifer, into the groundwater, or into the soil, or goes into plants and is evaporated back into the atmosphere to make more rain, right? Cycled. We're keeping it out of the river, especially during storm events, which is key from an ecosystem service standpoint, like flood mitigation standpoint. So one way to see this process of water enhancement and thus soil and whole site enhancement is to look at it through drawings, because it's harder to see than in photos, or it's easier to see than in photos. Excuse me. So if you think of an existing slope, it could have forest or not. And what's happening? Most of the water actually is running downhill on a heavy rain event. If you have really good soils and really good forest and pretty low angle slopes, you can infiltrate a lot of the water. But once you get above 1 inch, 2, 3 inches of rain, most of the water starts running off of the slope. Less so in forested systems, of course, but field systems for sure. Lawn, forget about it. Lawn is really pretty impervious. I know lawn's green and we think of it as permeable, but it's not that permeable. It's not permeable like a swaled system, which you'll see in a second. So here's what we do: a lot of this forest clearing on our landscape, because we have a lot of white pine plantation left over that we're trying to clear for a much more productive system. So if you've got this slope here and you clear the trees and you pile all the woody debris along the contour, the spacing can vary depending what you want to grow. Then you dig swales. This is what starts to happen with the water, right? So instead of 90+% running off the slope, you get 90+%, depending on the severity of the rain, going right down, forced to sit there. When it sits there, it starts to penetrate into the soil. And the neat thing is it's not just recharging the aquifer and not helping contribute to the flooding down in the valley bottom. It's growing plants rapidly. And that's kind of the selfish reason to do this. You know, I like to say this isn't just to help, you know, the river valley, you know, live in a better way, be more resilient, be less prone to flooding. The results we get from doing this, I mean, the growth of our plants is phenomenal. So now, you know, we're doing this simply to just get better production in our crop systems. And our crop systems, for the most part, are tree crops and berry crops. Where we plant on a mound, we get 3, 4, 5 times the growth rate than if we plant on that same spot if a mound wasn't made, or a swale. Now, we live on a pretty wet site, but there's a lot of land that's pretty wet, and we live on a poor soil site, but most land's pretty poor soil. So these strategies transfer to most people's sites. And if you do have really good slope, or if you do have really good soil, and you live on a dead flat piece of land, although no land is truly flat, maybe you'd benefit a little less from these systems, but you can still, there's still benefits to be had. But if you have any type of slope that's visible whatsoever, you're going to get a lot of gain out of swaling basic slopes. So we dig the swales, we do the earthworks first, or we always wish we had if we hadn't, because we're often digging up trees that were there now that we're realizing that our whole 10 acres should be swaled. I didn't know that until the last few years watching these swales in action. We dig the swales and then we plant on the tops, on those mounds. I call those the mounds. And we don't worry too much about being dead level on contour. I mean, it can't hurt, but if you're in a dry, arid region, you want to pull out the laser or the transit and really get dead on contour. For us, we just want to slow most of that water, and if anything, pitch the water towards the nearest ridge, watering the ridges from the valleys. That's a key line. That's really the basis of kind of what key line agriculture is shooting towards. I won't get into that per se, but check into keyline agriculture if you're interested in that. It's a very powerful approach. But we don't worry about being dead on contour, you know, to an inch over hundreds of feet anyway. We can eye that up well now. I've run a lot of logged too much time behind a mini excavator, enough that I can see the contour as I'm digging it. I don't need to take a lot of time to survey it, although it can't hurt. And then once we plant, we are ready to graze it, especially once the alleys between the swales start taking hold. That can take a little while, because what happens between this point and this point after you make a swale? What's going on right there? It's bare, right? You're scraping, you're digging that material, cut and filling. So you're creating total bare soil situation, right? Which is a bad thing, right? But actually, in the beginning, it's great because you're giving yourself a germination bed to start a whole new ecosystem and establish a lot more productive soil-building plants like vetch and various types of clovers and alfalfa. We seed about 10 to 20 species of plants right after we dig. And a lot of this land, we have persistent, really suboptimal plants like brambles and ferns and goldenrod. Not that each of those doesn't play a role, to some extent they do, but we have that to such an extent that it's hard to establish other more productive pasture for grazing or for soil building or ecosystem health. So actually clearing out the landscape, creating that disturbance is a very good thing, as long as you fill those niches made by the bare soil immediately, right? I like to say that heavy equipment should have a bag of seed strapped to it when you rent it or buy it, because you're going to blow holes in the ecosystem with it, which can be a very regenerative thing, or it can be a totally destructive thing, depending what you do immediately after you blow those holes in the ecosystem. If you don't seed after you use any type of heavy equipment, chances are you're leaving a wake of destruction behind you. So again, here's on contour versus off contour, or cross contour, just shown as an example in case that's not clear. Here's a photo 4 years ago what that same swale system that's depicted in those drawings looks like in reality. I don't have any photos the last few years because these sea berries which are on these mounds are so thick. Oh, it's just a wall of green. You don't see this. You can't even see the swales that well in the snow on the ground unless you point them out to people, because everything's just kind of smoothing out and growing in. But this is what it looked like right after we planted. So this slope right here went for about 10 to 15 years, could not produce enough biomass to graze or scythe or mow. None of that was happening. And then even though it was southwest facing, and then in the first year, right after we did this in the spring, we were able to graze this twice. All of a sudden, we had many, many times the biomass production in 1 year than we had in 10 or 15 years. And I didn't realize it until that moment that it's purely because the water was running off the slope and not going in. There was nothing for the plants to get. It was just droughted. There was nothing of value down in the soil structure for these plants. And plants aren't stupid. They don't start investing a lot of time and energy in a place where they can't live. That's one of the things that made me realize. And so now two more years in from that last photo, here, we've brought in the animals, and we started grazing Icelandic sheep 3 years ago, and now this has gone from about probably the least productive part of the property to the most. It's the most clear regeneration happening on these 10 acres. And it was totally beat up. And that's why it took a long time actually to get up the nerve to go in there with a little backhoe and start digging into the slope that's in such, bad straits. It's very counterintuitive to think, what am I doing? I'm just going to make it worse. Well, after 7 years of watching it, I realized I couldn't make it much worse. So we tried it. And I'm really glad I did it. Now we realize we need to do this over the whole property. These are hazelnuts here. They're already 10 feet tall. They've only been in the ground 3 years. There's bedrock between 0 to 1 inch below the surface here and 12 inches. This is just 0 to 12 inches of subsoil on bedrock. You can't appreciate it through these slides, but down in the swales where it's cut, most of the time I was scraping bedrock with the backhoe and just making a mound. And then enough soil has started to deposit that grass is growing. And we're getting pasture growth 3 times a season this high on a mat. Like you could roll this whole hillside down, like put it on a truck and install it somewhere else type of thing. It's just the top 2 to 12 inches we're working with. And as someone on a tour made me realize, we're not really farming the soil here. What are we farming? What are those plants really getting their value out of? The water, right, and the atmosphere. So I used to always, follow that organic farmer's mantra. It's all about the soil. It's all soil, soil, soil. Well, that's true, except it's about the water first. And that's one of the reasons fracking is so completely insane. As an aside, but I know it's going to affect you guys maybe a lot more than us, at least in the near term. So the water is the basis of the whole thing. Terribly sacred for that reason alone. Everything rides on it. So another principle I just want to bring up here is biological complexity and technological simplicity. I'll touch on the technological simplicity side in a little while. But from a biological end, we're always trying to promote as much biodiversity as possible, while also developing a system that's manageable. Because a completely ultra-high biodiversity system is hard to manage. It's hard to actually glean yields out of. I mean, it can be the kind of ultimate epitome of a forest garden idea, but you can walk around and miss, things are rotting because you can't quite catch it all. It's an ideal, and we shoot for it, but manageability becomes a difficult part of it. But at this stage in the system where there's a lot of healing to do in a landscape, we want to promote biological complexity, at every turn. This is a great example, though, of technological simplicity, right, with promoting biological complexity. Here's all sorts of biology redeveloping, right? Hazelnut, seaberry, plum, pears up here. There's also peaches, grazing animals, and maybe 20 to 30 species of forage going on down low in a place where there was, let's say, a third of those species. But we have one compromise we're using right now to make this system. Well, we used an excavator. That was a technical piece. And then here's polywire, right? Electronet. So in an ideal world, you'd see this photo, but with no polywire. Right? I viewed that as a compromise because that's something that's toxic in production to bake. It's not going to last a very long time. And what do you do with it when it's toast? Maybe you can turn it into something else. But it's not nearly the genius of these living systems, right? Which don't have any toxicity associated with them. They're healing at every step of the game, every stage in its evolution. So the technological simplicity piece is big. I'll talk more about that in a second. We're always trying to create structural diversity right across the site, and that's a good example. Looking back at this is structural diversity, right? We went from a flat field that had some brambles, 10, 20-year-old brambles, to this type of situation where all of a sudden we're farming in 3 dimensions, right? We're grazing down low, kind of that flat dimension, and then we've got cropping going on in the z-axis, right, in the 3rd dimension. What happens then is not only do we get more productivity because we have actually more surface area to farm, right? I'm actually on a different screen. Okay, right, look at this edge. right? We're working this whole edge versus this right here. Okay, so edge effect is a huge permaculture principle for this reason. You have more surface area, more interface. That's where production happens. That's where interaction occurs. But we're also creating very warm microclimates, right? So this pattern we always look to establish at any site we're working with, as long as we're in a cold part of the world, right? If south is to the left, you want taller and taller species planted of plants to the north, or buildings, right? So we're always putting our tallest elements to the north, our shortest elements to the south. I know that's really basic for people doing this work, but that's one of the few generic patterns you can say apply everywhere, on every site. As long as you're in a cold part of the world where cold is a limiting factor to growth, which it is here. Right? So we're basically always trying to create hot microclimates. Not that you don't have a use for these cool microclimates to grow, put your mushroom logs or grow your greens during the summer or whatever it is, but for the most part we're limited by lack of heat. Right? Now if you're in the southern hemisphere, obviously just flip south and north. So the microclimate complexity and the season extension that actually is happening from this is very important. Extending seasons wherever possible is something that's emerging as a primary strategy. This is also looking west down as part of our rice paddies and bottom pond to some terrestrial, what I call, they're like terrestrial paddies, but they're terraces, right? We're growing potatoes and squash for the most part and garlic on these terraces, rotating them. They could become paddies down the road, or we could turn our paddies into terraces if the rice project doesn't work out. We don't know yet, but the modularity of the system is very important and very doable. When you start cutting into a slope and making terraces, they could become a swale or a paddy or go back to a terrace very easily. Another important principle we're really always working with is considering tools that are needed to establish a system or might be helpful in establishing a system. Using those tools if they're available and affordable now, but not trying to build independence on those tools, right? So early on when I got to the site 10 years ago this September, I was somewhat fresh out of college and I was like, I want to develop this in the best way possible, the best example. I'm not going to use any fossil fuels. We're not going to bring anything in to do any of this. And as I've realized the need for earthworks over time, pretty quickly I realized we could dig these systems by hand and we'd have the landscape that's most optimal down the road, but it would take 100 years longer than it needs to. And I realized at the same time that using 5 gallons, let's say, of diesel fuel in a mini excavator, this is philosophically some may disagree with, but me not using those 5 gallons to create an intergenerational landform and something that's more productive until the next ice age isn't going to keep those 5 gallons of diesel from being burned. Chances are in probably flagrant ways or murderous ways in the military use. Or just for no good reason. So what I've come to think of systems establishment now is leveraging the resources that are available today to do what's necessary and not worrying about, the purity of those resources. Now that's a personal choice, but it's something I'm certainly glad I shifted to because, we would be digging, we'd have one swale so far, rather than the whole system getting close to being swaled out. For not much diesel fuel. And now these systems are independent of diesel fuel, of these inputs, because they are capturing much more fertility and water value on their own. Again, until the ice sheet comes back and levels it all, undoes all this, but that's hopefully a very long time, these systems are much more liberated from inputs than they would be if they were a straight slope. So, and it's interesting to think back on those old systems, right? They found that it was worthwhile to terrace and paddy those systems by hand before they had these resources. It was worthwhile to do that rather than fight the effects of gravity and losing constantly water and soil off their slopes. So if they found it was worth it, it would be hard to explain to my kids in 50 years why we didn't do these systems with very cheap resources today. Cheap
a lot of the terraces were built by slaves. So
it's true.
A different way to
absolutely. A lot of the earthworks was
labor.
Right, was done by slave labor, was the comment, or classes of societies that were very stratified and were forced to dig and dig and dig, because it did take generations to make systems like this. It doesn't need to right now if we get on these systems. Who knows in 50 years if it will be digging them again by hand? It's anyone's bet. But when we dig these systems, we mulch them heavily. Again, we come in. This is a bare soil situation created here, right? So think of this as immense opportunity. You can establish whatever you want for the most part right here. What seed to put there is a big decision. We always go for the most soil-building, best forages possible. It's plants like a lot of clovers and vetch and alfalfa, as I mentioned, and turnip and radish, that will build this system and slow and spread and sink water as quickly as possible and facilitate these plants. Here we're planting grapes. This is a small little vineyard that we planted last spring. Another shot of it here. This is after it's all planted and mulched, and then we'll come through and usually with hay or straw mulch the areas in between. Or if the weather just looks just right, we'll actually get good results with no mulch in between if we're at the right time of year. That's why we like to do these systems in the early spring. So if the spring dries up like it has for the last 2 years, we'll do this as early as possible because then you have the whole summer to get these systems green and to start stabilizing these slopes. If you have to do these late in the summer, you're much more restricted as to what plants you can seed and get going. You got to start using annual rye and things that aren't that optimal. And then you might have to deal with them down the road. Annual rye is a good reason for annual rye, though, if you're late in the year on these systems. So another shot of establishing these systems. This is digging our first two rice paddies 4 years ago. It took 5 gallons of diesel and a day to carve these 2 paddies. And that was the first time I'd ever made paddies. So I think I could do them about half the time now. A lot of the time was spent leveling these out. That was the trickiest part. And it was also very steep up here, and I hadn't even been on a mini excavator at that point and never on a real steep slope, so I was doing a lot of figuring out as I was going. Now, these systems don't need to take very long. You can make paddies like this, 2 paddies in, a few hours, unless you have major roots or boulders to deal with. Some shots of our rice production system, because it is a great example of some of the most resilient food production systems we're working with, and people are very interested in it. It's basically like growing onions, long season vegetable, right now, because our season is cold enough in Vermont, and probably here too, the frost-free season is short enough that you can't get away with maturing rice without kind of stealing a month of the growing season with starts under protection, right? So we have to start them with a little cold frame. Now we have a greenhouse, which we'll use, but we'll probably still use some cold frames too, because the greenhouse space is at a premium. We've experimented with doing them just in seed trays dry, like you would do vegetables, or flooded, like you see here. They both work pretty well, and this is more work, so we've stopped flooding the starts. We'll do about 1,200 starts this way, and it takes a little getting used to because you're seeding a grain in each cell tray, 1 grain seed at a time. Kind of a wacky way to grow grain, but we're not doing this commercially. This is for a homestead use. And that's really the primary focus of the 10 acres I live on is to supply the food, medicine, fiber, fuel that we need, a family of 2, 4, 6, 10 might need on this property. It's not to turn this material into money. So on a commercial scale, these things start getting mechanized, and even paddy agriculture has gotten incredibly mechanized. They seed in places with airplanes in California. But you can plant out 1,200 seeds pretty quickly, as any veggie farmer knows. And we are experimenting with spacings. 9 to 12 inches is what we've been working with. We're moving towards thinking 9 inches is a good spacing, but it's all very management dependent and strain dependent as well. So this is what they look like as seedlings. Planted out, this is in late June probably. We're starting to integrate ducks into the system right before this stage. They're starting to put seed on in this photo, actually, right about then, and that's when you want to pull the ducks out of the system. I think I have some shots of that in a second. It's a great group project because there are a lot of seedlings to go in the ground, and it's pretty easy. You just got to work backwards so you're not stepping over your seedlings that you just put in the ground. We have a lot of college groups and high school groups even, and other permaculture courses come and visit the farm and plug into projects. So this is what it looks like as it's putting on seed, emerging. It doesn't tend to cross-pollinate at all unless you hand-pollinate because the seeds are pollinated within the column, within the rice stalk there. Come late summer, you start seeing quite a bit of grain on the rice heads. And the amazing thing is the yield of rice, doubles terrestrial grain. That's one of the reasons rice feeds the world, right? There's more calories produced for human beings with rice than any other crop, but it's third in land area. you can get 5,000 plus pounds an acre. Right? So it's double. That's organic rice under good conditions, at least. I've heard someone just cited California is actually producing more than 6,000 pounds an acre. So it dwarfs what you can get out of a terrestrial system. And you don't need the manure spreaders slash soil compactors, right, every year. Constant input, constant expense, constant beating up the landscape to return the fertility to the system. That's why no one's grown wheat for 4,000 years in the same place, right? Or any type of terrestrial grain. Taro and rice, pretty much. There's a few other crops. Only water-based systems, because the water is how the fertility gets to the system. And you can do that perpetually. And you're creating an ecosystem, too, when you have a flooded system, a very complex ecosystem. And one other value of the water, does anyone know one other very important reason of the water? It's weed suppression. Right? So the rice doesn't need to be flooded. It just can handle it. And what's happening here is actually the coolest part about paddy agriculture are the paddies, not the rice. The rice is just the most well-fitted plant for human consumption, I think, that humanity's found so far. But don't let that stifle your imagination. What can we grow in paddies is a big question. I think I'd like to focus the rest of my life on it, on trying to experiment with other things in these paddies, because it's the paddy that's the brilliant part of the system and how it utilizes water and how it doesn't give up its fertility, how it accrues fertility. The rice is great, and it's a grain, and it stores, and you can do a homestead scale pretty easily, but the birds love it. They've been eating our crop. They found it. They learned it was there. It took them 2 years, but now the last 2 years, they start eating it, and they're pretty formidable pests to have to protect the rice from. And, it's also grain. I'm personally moving more to a paleo type of diet, so I'm not big on grain. But it is fantastic in that you can store it for, not just years, but decades upon decades. I mean, there's grain seeds they found that are viable from the pyramids, the time of the pyramids. So being able to store food for more than a year, if you have a whole year of crop system, crop failure, which is really not only possible, it's inevitable. I mean, there's things like the year without a summer. They happen just from volcanoes erupting. They'll happen again. Grain can get you through that, or live animals. Even your squash ain't going to last 2 years, right? Not potatoes, not maybe the best keepers of apples could get by, certainly hard cider. But grain's in a class of its own along with dry beans. I just think grain is a lower quality food, much lower quality food than some of the other things, as well as dry beans. But it has incredible advantages. And the neat thing about grain, as most of us who've kept animals know, it's total currency, right? Everyone on the farm or homestead wants to eat grain. So there's any animal pretty much is going crazy over grain. And keeping the ducks out of the paddies at this point in the system is also a key challenge. One time we lost probably a third of our rice to our own ducks when they were removed from the paddy a month before, but they broke back in. And they bum rushed the fence when I was away for like 4 days, and I didn't discover it till I got back. So the ducks are a big part of the system, and the genius of duck rice agriculture is really incredible. It's thousands of years old. Check out The Power of Duck if you're interested in what's really this coevolution between ducks and rice in a human-managed ecosystem. Baby ducks, we've been propagating our own ducks with the help of the mothers, of course. This is Coco Chanel and one of her babies. We had 8 ducks that year. She did, and then we brought them right into the paddies. And this is the time when the ducks really do their magic. The rice has no seed, so they're not interested in it. And the ducks are very small. They're too small to just knock the rice over just by moving around. So all they do, since the rice the silica content in the rice itself is too high to be palatable for the ducks, they're not interested in it. They go through and pick out every other weed and poop it out and fertilize the rice with it. To an extent you could never do. I mean, if you could hover over the rice paddy on your stomach, or someone hold you up from your feet and move you around, you could weed it without disturbing the rice, but you wouldn't be manuring it like they are. So it's really a perfect system. It's one of these perfect agricultural systems that when you find it work, you realize, oh yeah, people have known this for thousands of years. We're not discovering this for the first time. Just tapping into what has been and oftentimes lost. So this is the rice as it's maturing. Here is putting the rice up once it's dried. Beautiful, beautiful plant. I never knew how beautiful grain production could be until growing rice. I hadn't really spent much time except with amaranth. Was lucky. Everyone always asks, well, how do you dehull it? That's the hard part. And if you grow grain, it's all, it can all be easy until you realize, oh, how am I going to get all these hulls off these millions of grains? And, we started using a rolling pin at first and realized, well, we're not going to eat much. We're just going to spend time with the rolling pin. And luckily, I went to buy a wood stove in a barn in Vermont, and they had all these old agricultural treasures, old hand-powered equipment. And I was looking around and just pointed to this one unit right here that you see in this photo and said, well, what's that? And the guy was like, oh, well, you don't want that. I don't know how it got here, but it's a rice dehuller. No one grows rice anywhere near this part of the world. And I was late in the day. I thought I must have been hallucinating. This guy just told me there's a rice dehuller in his barn and he doesn't want it. And he doesn't know how it got there, so I still don't get it. I guess I'm supposed to grow rice. It works great, and it's made in Osaka, Japan, and it might be the only one on this continent. I mean, there's just no cause for these to be in North America. Maybe there will be if we start growing rice, and people in Vermont are starting to get on board for sure. Does a great job, and I think it would work with all sorts of grains. All it does is spin the rice really quickly. We were like a fraction of the way into making one of these, probably not work near as well with a lathe and in the wood shop, but it was going to take a long time, and fortunately we ended up having to make it. That's what it looks like when it's hulled, when it's got the hull on and after the hull's off. You can see there's some immature grains in here, but actually so interesting too when you cook. I've never eaten rice that had been grown anywhere within thousands of miles of where I lived. Never saw it produced. And fresh rice cooks in about 15 minutes. And you don't need 2-to-1 water. I burned the first time I tried to cook it. I burned it, toasted it all. It cooked in 15 minutes and only needed it needed a fraction as much water because it was totally fresh and hydrated and tasted way better, as you can imagine. So it's kind of like I've heard old Italians say, never eat dry pasta. Like always make fresh, make the pasta as you go. It's a different food. And this type of rice really is different than stale rice, which is what we get at the store. So it's one of those neat parts of once you start to grow something for yourself, it's a totally different food, and the culinary aspect, that's what just goes through the roof. So this is our leach field. I just want to touch on this for a second. Spread fertility, right, and use fertility where it's most concentrated. Work at the concentrations. Maximum outputs for minimum inputs. Right, everyone's leach field, if you're unfortunate as we are to have one, it's the most fertile part of your system. Try to use it, unless it's been loaded up with toxins, which unfortunately a lot have. It's incredibly productive. It doesn't lack for nutrients, that's for sure. Actually, that's the problem. We've been kind of testing the system to see what we could grow, thinking, well, maybe we can do better than just biomass, which we always just scythed it and turned it into the compost, just a nitrogen producer, soil maker. But we actually realized that we can grow squash really well. It matures. Anyone know what the problem with our sunflowers, for instance? Total problem. They never made seed. They just kept growing towards the sky through the fall. Right? Too much nitrogen. No cause, no stimulus in the plant to actually reproduce. Thought it's just growing forever. And so it was a lot of greenery, but no sunflowers. We wanted the seed. The squash seems to deal with that high nitrogen and just kind of regulate itself. Another example of system establishment is something we've really been excited about, and especially for the first few years of a plant on poor sites, is foliar feeding. It's kind of like an IV drip for the plant. A lot of our trees in the early years, the site was so poor. If we just planted out an apple tree and mulched it once really well, it would grow from the little bit of compost we put in the hole and the mulch fertility going down in the soil. The first year it might grow 10 to 16 inches. The following year it would grow 4 inches, and then it would slow down to 1 to 4 inches. That's not what you want your apple trees growing every year. So without some addition, these plants would not get established. They would just get eaten by deer constantly because it's a race to get above deer browse where we are. Not nearly as bad as it is here, but it's still, we're not really relaxed about a tree living until it's at least 6 feet on up. And so what we found is you could really get a plant growing quickly, 12 to 24 inches, which is a nice range for most fruits before they're ready to bear, early on with foliar feeding. Technologically simple. These things tend to work pretty well. They don't break too often. You can keep some parts on hand. You can use urine or fish emulsion, or you can make manure tea yourself. If you bubble it, all the better, but Anaerobic compost tea works great. I know that's sacrilege for some people to say, but it does. It works awesome. You got to be an early day or late day, right, to get the stomata on the leaves to take up the nutrients. So don't do it in the middle of the day. But now once the plants get established and the comfrey and the other understory plants are really doing their work and the mulch is worked in, then we don't need to constantly do this foliar feed. Once it's above deer browse, now we're putting on 6 to 14 inches or so a year on its own because the soil food web has gotten going. But in the beginning, it needs that help along on a poor site. Anyway, we have clients, you just plant an apple tree and mulch it once and you come back and there's apples, and that's great. But our site is more like most of the world. Mention animal systems here for a handful of minutes before we wrap up. They're really kind of the second half of our systems development in the last 4 to 5 years is when we really started bringing them in, and really more each year. So this is a crop of meat birds that we did 2 years ago, and I even tried goats for a little while because a friend needed a home for goats. We knew we didn't want goats, and now we really know, because goat is basically the opposite of a tree. Goat here and a tree here, and never the two shall meet if you want the tree to survive. So you can do goats in a forestry type of system, but you have to spend a lot of either time or money or both on fencing. And goats are awesome. I mean, this baby goat and the dog got along famously, but the difficulty of raising a polyculture, perennial polyculture, which is the backbone of our system, and integrating animals for the fertility values within it, which is really the core challenge that we're working with in a lot of ways on the production end, doesn't allow for goats. And it makes it even difficult for sheep, because even sheep will overstress the plants. Birds are awesome, in our system. They've been great. It's always a balance of trying to figure out how much management you have to go into them. The ducks have been the lowest management, best output, least input, best output. They've been basically impeccably healthy. Don't have to deal with worms, parasites. A lot of challenge that we have had to with sheep, but they don't graze the woody debris and the kind of brushiness that the site has a lot of, and we need to turn into soil and into better plants. Look at this clover sward. So ducks and clover have a synergistic relationship, because wet clover, grows slugs amazingly well. I don't know if slugs actually eat the clover, but where we have really damp clover, we have an incredible amount of slugs. And our original reason for getting ducks was to not have slugs destroy our garden, because they were starting to, because we have mulch everywhere and clover everywhere and it's wet everywhere. So it's perfect for growing slugs. Like in permaculture, I say, well, what eats that? If you have a problem, you don't look at it like, how do you remove that? You say, what can you turn that into? So ducks turn slugs into eggs, right, via clover, essentially, is what's going on. So great example of turning a problem into a solution. If you have, I think I've heard Bill Mollison is cited as saying you don't have a slug problem, you have a lack of duck problem, something like that.
It's not a shortcut of slugs; it's a dearth of ducks.
Right. A dearth of ducks. They do a fantastic job, and they're always working all day, walking around. And they can be a little loud. They're definitely prone to predation, but that's where the dogs have come in a big way. And this guy was a tiny little puppy in this shot. That's actually just last spring. Levon the lamb, who was born on site. We've had up to 6 sheep, I think, at any given time, or 5. And now we're going to try to go to cows for this year after 3 years of sheep. The sheep were great, and they've done a lot of great work. And I love sheep. They're awesome animals to have around. I get along with them. Like we had pigs, and I just don't like pigs personally. I don't have a good connection with pigs. But with sheep, they're really great. And but they've been a lot of work, and I talk about it quite a bit in my book. It's too much to get into right now, but we always, intensively graze, move, quick timings, high stock densities. If you're aware of intensive rotational grazing, that's what we're focused on. If you're interested in how to build soil super rapidly, check out rotationally intensive grazing. That's really like mob stock grazing, with people like Joel Salatin are pioneering. That's incredible what it's done for the system. And our systems started to get more robust from the planting and the seeding and then the ducks, but it took on a whole nother level when we brought the grazers in. All of a sudden, the biomass is being cycled and lushness is kind of the rule wherever the sheep have been. We're always bringing them in when the sward's high, at least the closer to knee high, the better, and then letting them graze it down to just ankle high or even higher before moving them on. So oftentimes we'll move sheep every day. So it's a lot of work if you have plants you're trying to not have them eat everywhere. So then you start wanting to plant in hedges everywhere, never in random patches. And so we go through and realize, well, why did I put an apple just out in the middle of nowhere? That's a great place to graze. Or have a wall of 2 hedges and graze in between. We're also moving towards plants that are really grazable, like elderberry or seaberry or hawthorn. This is just an explanation of how intensive rotational grazing works. Check it out on our website for more details. It take a little while to get into detail on it, but the soil building capacity of it is really astounding. It's all about promoting root dieback, as many root dieback events as possible, while the roots are penetrating ever deeper into the soil, or turning those roots into carbon that was in the atmosphere. So it's a reverse carbon conveyor belt, right? Of atmosphere, we're taking atmosphere and putting it in the soil via plants and animals. That's generally what. It's a good way to describe permaculture, really. Chickens do this in a lot of ways through their grazing and scratching, but mainly through their fertilizing, allowing for other plants to take hold and grow rapidly. This is a little mobile chicken unit that we made, thinking we'll move it all around and put them in at night. It'll be awesome. We can put the electronetting right on top. But on our site, with tons of grade and boulders everywhere, this idea, which you hear a lot of farmers having great success with, isn't so easy. And, we got rolled over and run over by this a few times. And, after a while, you're like, okay, I better have at least 2 other people help move this around, or it's just not worth the risk. Getting, completely trashed by it. So we ended up abandoning this. It was just too much work, moving the chickens really in zone 1 and 2, but not further out into the farm where we really needed to scratch up a lot of poor field and get it into better condition. Chickens doing a great job of that, but it's just management to actually get them mob stocking in those areas. And then, as I've mentioned, we seed everywhere. We'll use as a carrier, since you need carrier materials to not overseed, which is just expensive. We'll use green sand and azomite. One of those one-time inputs that we don't keep putting in, but we might as well remineralize while we're spreading seed. So that's what you see in this photo is green sand, azomite, and bone char, along with yellow blossom sweet clover, white blossom sweet, New Zealand white clover, Dutch clover, sulfur, turnips, radish. We realize we don't need to devote garden space to turnip or radish. They'll just grow everywhere. Just put them in your seed mix and start spreading. Start spreading broadcasting-wise as much as you can really afford to or get your hands on. If you save seed, even better if you collect seed. There's nothing easier than walking around and broadcasting seed. That's the absolute easiest way to grow food. It's just seeing what comes up. A lot of stuff can, especially if you're on land that's got some fertility to it. Fire has been a major tool. We've really only kind of done 2 fire events. It's actually kind of hard to get any piece of Vermont to burn. It's too wet most of the time. Last year, there was some real drought, but it needs to be early in the season to take maximum advantage of this germination bed that you're really making for yourself. A pH upped germination bed that's bare of other plants which are outcompeting the more optimal soil building forages that you want. So we'll seed immediately. If you can scratch it in a little, all the better, but over multiple acres that becomes impractical. And we've gone from systems like this. I mean, look at this pasture. It's white pine, some ferns coming up, some brambles coming up, and there's nothing here for a sheep to really eat. And there's incredibly slow, kind of dinosaur scale soil building go on here, right? And here, there's an understory of clover right here, and all this coming up under the brambles and fern and goldenrod. So we'll go through then and scythe, holding the scythe 6 inches up, knocking the canopy of plants that we're trying to get ahead of down. And with a combination of some strategic scythings and burning and seeding, we're able to transform this type of situation into this after a little while, and then into this by midsummer. And that's better looking than most really well-managed pastures I see around Vermont. Now, I'm not expecting it to stay this good all the time without real intensive rotational grazing, but this is pure 3-4 foot stand of vetch and clover, a little bit of brambles and ferns maybe survive, but they don't. It doesn't matter. The sheep have more food in 10 square feet of this slide than in 2 acres of this. There's almost no food value, and certainly nutrition value there. So it's those disturbance mechanisms that allow that succession to happen in an optimal way. So we start thinking of disturbance as a potentially very good thing, very necessary thing. Disturbance has this negative connotation. It certainly should not. It's all about disturbance management. That's really what our job becomes in permaculture. Biomass and biodiversity being a key metric of how regenerative we are helping land to be. This is this was all white pine monoculture. A year before this photo, this was the understory of a white pine. This was just pure pine needles. Just a year before this photo. I don't really believe it myself, but I just know that was the case. When I look at the photo, it's hard to believe, but that is exactly what happened. We logged it, we swaled it, spread seed, started grazing. By the end of the summer, this is how it looked. Pea shoots and pea flowers, 5 feet tall, and turnips and radish coming up everywhere. So there's a lot of human food in it as well. You can see, these are the swales. So this is cut. It's like cut here, cut here. Here's a cut, swale, another cut above it, cut here, swale. And where there's woody debris, we'll hugelkulture it. We'll put that woody debris in the mounds. And actually try to burn those mounds a bit too, and sometimes that's like a hugel char type of technique, like biochar and hugelkulture combined. This is a baby goat finding rest wherever you can on a cold day. And the synergy that emerges when you just start overlapping these systems is one of the neatest things, most spectacular things to witness. You start overlaying biology in a way that people normally don't do on a farm. You start seeing all these synergies emerge that you never read about or never heard about. I didn't realize when I took this photo that what the chickens were doing. I just thought they were hanging out. Maybe there was some bugs. This sheep was healthy all summer. When we slaughtered the chickens and then sold the sheep to a farmer in the next town over, this sheep died of fly strike 3 weeks later. And I looked back at this photo and realized, oh crap, the chickens were eating all the fly larvae, probably keeping the sheep healthy all summer. I didn't know that was going on, until looking back at the situation. That's just one of the many synergies that just kind of emerge by facilitating the diversity and just being kind of an ambassador for the diversity. John Todd said, just get as many species there as possible. They'll figure it out. You can't know how it all works. That's how he described his living machine invention. And how that really works is the complexity there is mind-blowing. But what we can do is ensure that a lot of that complexity is assembled. We can be assemblers in that way. Great example of structural diversity, begetting biological, right? Making stone walls wherever you can, planting, creating vertical structure with plants or built elements. Buildings are a quick way to get vertical structure. Utilize that. Think of, in marine biology, we know this all to be true, right? If a ship falls down on a sandy bottom that's pretty lifeless, what happens in that area? We call it artificial reef. It becomes full of life because there's structural diversity. Prey and predation can start taking place. Structural diversity happens in terrestrial zones as well, just as much. But I've only heard that term applied in marine biology context. Same deal out of the ocean. Bees are a fantastic way of this one principle, maximum outputs for minimum inputs. The amount of work they do, we need to all get very, very adept at bee care, which we're certainly in the beginning stages of, but especially where they're at with the world, with how sensitive they are to toxins, and probably not just chemical toxins, but electromagnetic toxins, which are just, profuse in the atmosphere today. So bees are being found to be very sensitive to that level of electromagnetic influence in the air. Planting, sowing again, seeds as much as possible. This is a pond berm right after construction. This is 3 weeks after making a pond berm. This is what a fresh area of excavation should look like when you're done with it, within a few weeks. We always see people building homes and making piles of fill and leaving yards bare. If there's excavation, figure out where you're done and seed it that day. But you got to know where you're done, so you need a plan. because it's easy to think, well, we might be driving over that again, so don't waste any seed, although seed's really cheap and you can spread it over a wide area. If in doubt, seed it. You'll be glad you did most of the time. If you really mix up a lot of seed and spread it out, it's not very expensive, and the benefits are just extreme. We're always planting trees every year, and now that we're propagating our own trees, we realize it can be very affordable. So we're ending up now planting like hundreds of trees a year on 10 acres. And if you include black locust and willow, we've planted probably 3,000 to 4,000 trees all in all, actually, including this spring, that much. And how can you plant thousands of trees on 10 acres? Well, some trees like black locust, timber trees, you can plant on 5 to 12-inch centers and just get straight poles of building materials. So all of a sudden you realize if you do that in hedges, you can fit 5,000 to 10,000 trees on 10 acres. Maybe 5,000, but you can stock it densely and then start harvesting. I'll talk about that in a minute, black locust, because it's so important. Apples, apple might be the totem tree of the Northeast if we have one. Maybe not quite as multifunctional as the coconut, but like the way the coconut was a totem tree to people in Polynesia, useful in so many different ways and so reliable. So is our apple. That's really probably the best we have when it comes to a fruit. Although with early frosts, as we know in Vermont, and I think I heard there was some of that here last year, a plant that depends on setting fragile flowers early in the year, which apples do, may become more challenging. Apples may be on their way out as far as a reliable crop, and as global weirding kind of settles into decades of, probably centuries of a climate weirded situation. Late flowering plants take on a whole new resilience, like elderberry, kiwi. Those have been incredible. Or really frost hardy plants, hazelnut, right? Hazelnut's hardy to 10 degrees, the flower. So it doesn't, chances are we're not getting less than 10 degrees after mid-March when hazelnuts flower on our site. So we're getting great yields of hazelnuts, even those years when we had literally apples were non-existent, even wild apples in my neighborhood last year. These are our hazelnuts, hazelberts, originally sourced from St. Lawrence Nursery, that we're growing a lot of. Bur oak is one of the fastest growing nuts we've found. It's even looking like it might start yielding within the first 10 years, which is amazing for a nut tree. Most nuts are very long-term. Hawthorn, incredible medicine. If I knew the value of hawthorn, I would have never thought of them as a weed because they're coming up all over the farm. And I was like, well, I realized early on, actually, that we could grow pears on them. This is pear grafted onto hawthorn. If you graft 6 to 7 feet up or higher, you have a deer-proof pear tree already planted for you if the hawthorn exists. And most of us, if we have any bit of rural land in Northeast, might find some, you're likely to find a bunch of hawthorn on it. But now I realize, actually, I don't even want pears compared to hawthorn. The medicine is so powerful, heart and blood medicine, that I won't even do this again, top work of hawthorn, cut a lot of it down to grow pear, because pears just aren't nearly as important. I'll talk about why in a minute here because of the health benefits and the need to stay healthy, not just fed. But it is neat that you can make a deer-proof pear tree, for sure. In a place like the Northeast and beat-up land where there's a lot more wood than there is soil, fungi are almost a necessity. And, fungi is to wood as plants are to soil, so that's all you need. You don't need soil to grow fungi. You just need some low-value hardwoods. We found sugar maple to be the best where we are. Red oak, which you have a lot more of down here, are supposedly better. Luckily, you have some good resident mushroom experts around here, so they have a lot of good information. We found red maple to work, but not nearly as well. It doesn't last as long. But it would be great if red maple was as good because it's constantly regrowing. We're always pollarding, cutting red maple down, it's sprouting. It's more perpetual production. But these kinds of yields are coming from sugar maple mostly. And one of the greatest things we love about the shiitakes is not only their nutrient density, which is extreme, very, very good for the body on a lot of fronts, but how easy they are to process and dry. These should actually be, we've learned since, gills up. And when they're dried, gills facing up, there's a lot of evidence to say that the vitamin D content goes way up. And so they're actually improved by solar drying versus degraded. Most plant materials, if you solar dehydrate, you wouldn't do that with most herbs, for instance. You're denaturing the plant and degrading it. Mushrooms can be greatly improved and dry very well and store for years when they're dried. transforming dead matter into living. Not that a wood chip is dead, but it's a lot less living than mycelium, less living than mushrooms, right? A lower level of complexity, arguably. So we're always trying to transform dead matter to living. And really, what's going on here? If this wood chip is on top of bedrock, there's a lot of evidence to show how mycelium actually helps facilitate the transformation of bedrock into bioavailable minerals, into soil, into plants, into complex levels of life. Mushrooms are at the root of that, or more accurately, the mycelium, their root of the mushroom. We've had success with oyster on poplar, so it's a great way to add value to poplar, which is otherwise a very low value wood. So if you find yourselves with a lot of poplar, which too many of us do, you might want to consider oyster mushrooms. They haven't been as reliable as shiitake, but pretty good. This is a golden oyster. Morels we grew one year, made the bonfire in the woods, according to the instructions from Field and Forest Products, which are great suppliers of some of these spawn. And they came up in that summer. We had morels. They didn't come back since then. So we figured we had a great business model. We'll just grow morels. This will be awesome. Hundreds of pounds of morels, right? Very profitable. It would be a great crop, but they're not that easy to grow, which might be a good thing. Of course, in where I live in northern half of New England, the parameter is our cold climate, in large part to living well and sustainably and resiliently in a place. Here, a little less so, but it's still pretty cold. And it's still a place where it takes a lot more calories to stay warm than it does to be fed. Right? I started looking into this over the years as I've been splitting wood now for a long time. And it's a lot of work, and you realize, well, look at all this material. I mean, can you imagine that all being food and how much you would eat in a year? Right? And what I've realized over time is burning it well is key. It's crucial, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the sheer amount of wood, let me scroll ahead to it for a second, that you actually need to stay warm is at least 8 to 10 times more energy than you can eat. Right? So if you think about you call an armload of wood into your stove, how many times you do a day, what if that was food? Could you keep up with eating that much food? Right, a fraction. So therefore, down in the landscape, you need that much more energy capture, solar energy transformation into material to stay warm than be fed. So as far as keeping yourselves, you got to stay warm to live. So as far as living in this cold climate place, fuel wood is a huge part of the design challenge. And it's amazing how many people are growing a lot of their own food but aren't paying attention to how much wood they're using. Your average home in Vermont, if they heat with wood, burns 5 to 6 cords a year and of wood, which is, here's 72,000 pounds of wood you're moving. If you move it twice in a year, or 3 times, which is usual, sometimes more, and that's often with some propane or oil input. So we're down to about 2 cords of wood, and that's to heat all of our hot water as well. So this wood cook stove, we bake in, we cook on the top, we dehydrate, heats 40 gallons of hot water. We'll boil a 40-gallon tank if we don't take a bath every day or a long shower. And it heats our whole space of 1,500 square feet. So multiple crucial functions with one element there. I can't believe it took me this long to kind of establish this system. I can't believe they're not more widespread. I've seen one of these systems in someone else's house. It should be in all of our homes in a cold climate, I think. It seems like. I don't see any system that comes close to this level of performance. Masonry heaters are very efficient, but I don't see people heating their water very well with them or cooking on top of them. They can bake in them. Sometimes I've heard of people heating their water with them. But it's kind of a no-brainer. There aren't a lot of efficient airtight wood cook stoves on the market, though. So,
what's the name of that stove?
What's that? That's a Waterford Stanley. That's a good question.
What is it?
Waterford Stanley. Yeah. So
Made in the U.S.?
it's made in Ireland, but it's only one of 2 airtight woods cook stoves you can get, unless you make your own, which is probably someone should start doing. 2 cords of wood total, all hot water, all space heat, all cooking. We can grow those 2 cords of wood on less than a fifth or a sixth of our land. And with black locust, which I'll talk about in a second, we could potentially grow a lot more in a smaller space. Chainsaw, maybe the best use of fossil fuel I can think of besides moving earth. Not that you can't cut a lot of wood by hand with a buck saw, but you won't get to many other things. In the meantime, that might be nice to get to. So I've chosen to get 20 years worth of chainsaw parts. It's not very expensive. Be able to make chain myself, which saves a lot of money. Be able to, at least for as long a period of time, cut my own wood quickly or help neighbors with it. If the global flow of parts from China stops for a little while or a long while, it's a pretty vulnerable system, amazingly. And there's lots of little parts that go into these machines that we use every day. So you might as well get set up, if you can, to have a long-term chainsaw use. You don't need a gallon of, they say, if properly applied, a gallon of gasoline is 40 human labor hours. Right? So how do you want to apply it is really the question. It could be more than that if it's applied well, or a lot less than that if it's like driving down a flat road that you could be on a bike. But if it's moving earth with every bucket, think about the multiplier there. Here's 50 black locust whips, which is the size we plant them. So maybe that's 10 to 20 cords of wood in 20 years. Grows that quickly. It's the only tree that grows as fast as the fastest growing softwoods like poplar, some birches, willow. But those are all very weak wood, very poor wood generally, and light and not good heat value. Black locust grows that fast, but it's as dense as hickory and white oak. More rot resistant than both. So essentially it's the fastest way of getting carbon from the atmosphere into the soil and into lignin and cellulose, a usable material from gaseous, atmospheric carbon. So these are 2 years in the ground from those whips. This is what they look like 2 years later. They're already 15 feet tall. After another year, they're 20 feet tall, and we've pollarded them. We've cut them down once already from, arm reach height. They're fixing nitrogen. They're making more honey on an acre of black locust, they say, than with any other plant, because of the nectar production. So it's a super tree. You have to kind of plant a tree like that. It's not just there to not be utilized, although it is illegal to plant in Massachusetts now. So like many of the other things that make a lot of sense, it might be illegal where you are someday to do or to work with. So that's one of that. When that happened, we started to plant a lot more because we figured maybe it would be illegal in Vermont. Because of its supposed invasive nature. Yeah, it's very successful in abused and abandoned sites. Yeah, spreading on its own, doing really well without people.
In fact, it is considered an invasive in many counties in New York State.
Yeah, it's starting to be considered invasive in Vermont as well. So it's an incredible plant on really every front. And what we do is we haven't really seen any shoots come out from them, but where we have, we're grazing it 3-4 times a year, so those shoots are eaten down. It's the favorite food of the sheep besides for comfrey and clover. And if they've had access to comfrey and clover, they'll go for black locust first, really. It's super high in nutrition. It's not supposedly that good for horses. Horses in general a lot pickier than a lot of sheep, but it's very, very good for a lot of grazing animals. Like a lot of legumes are very high in protein. They're great forages. Yeah, so a lot of our hedges, really all of our hedges are planted as living fences too. So down the road we'll weave them together or lay them or put wire between and they'll be fences. But yeah, they're the best fence posts. In Vermont, yeah, you can plant a fence. So we've got 3 sides of 4 on our property are planted in black locust every 12 to 18 inches. There's like 900 right there because it's just a perimeter fence. Chances are you usually want a fence on your perimeter, so planting it off the bat in black locust is a pretty a pattern you probably want to apply on most sites, I think, in this climate. Osage orange is similar in much warmer zones. Those posts in Vermont, old Vermonters like to say, a black locust will last 1 year less than a granite post. And they'll outlive cedar rails by 20 years, apparently. And they're in the ground. So just from an economic perspective alone, black locust could replace the pressure-treated lumber industry if we wanted it to. Right off the bat, in short order. In 10, 15 years, you could have that kind of saw timber ready. Just some shots I want to end on here, the last minute or two. Is just how we're starting to eat. In the last few years, this has become the kitchen has started to be the focus of the whole farm homesteading operation, and kind of almost the most enjoyable part. Seeing the plants grow is still really enjoyable, but to have lamb sausage and potatoes and greens and kimchi and krauts, the whole year, at regular meals, have this kind of quality of food that's all coming from within 100 yards or less of where you're living. it starts to change the personal experience of it, in a major way. Way more. I never anticipated that part either. I wasn't really doing it for that part, but that part's almost the best now, kind of where it all comes home to, and thinking about the whole cooking and processing part becomes the major job, and I know less about that than how to produce these plants. We think of our production on the plants in two ways. It's important to get across, and it's really staples and nutrient-dense food. So all of these are staples, except for the bright colors, right? The nutrient-dense foods. Although you could argue that cabbage is nutrient-dense if you lacto-ferment it, which is definitely true. Or not just nutrient-dense, but a potentizer for the body, a potent tonic for the body working in a vigorous way. There's one plant in here, one yield that's just for fun. What is it? It's not a staple or nutrient-dense or health-promoting in a deep way. I hate to rain on anyone's favorite. I love them. That's why I grow them, but that's it. Lemon cukes, right? They're cooling, and that's great in the summer, but really they're just a bunch of water and a little bit of vitamins. So that's how we're starting to think of if we're going to devote intensive garden space to vegetables, which is most work for yield of anything we're doing. It's got to be either a staple or it's got to be nutrient-dense on one end. So that's kind of our metric. We're experimenting with different aspects of preserving. This is a clamp. Just dig a hole in the ground. It's a little more sophisticated than the hole in the ground, but basically it's a hole in the ground. The potatoes kept really well. The cabbages rotted right out, and the apples rotted right out. But the turnips and potatoes were better than when we put them in the fall. Now we have a root cellar, so it's easier. But these are the potatoes when they came out of the clamp. We cooked up a soup, and I thought the soup had salt and butter put in it. And I asked, what was in the soup when we were eating it, and it was apparent that nothing had been put in the soup at all. And they tasted like they're actually, enriched with it tasted like it had butter in it. These potatoes got so good after cooking. It was incredible. It's neat when storage improves the quality of the food, and storing in earth can certainly do that. This is yesterday, the day before. We're starting to cut ice for the first time this year. Been living around all these ponds, and I haven't cut any ice, which is kind of amazing because it's certainly in more abundance than anything else we have. There's plenty of ice besides rock, but now we have a root cellar, so there's a place to put it. So it started getting me thinking about, okay, let's do something with this ice. And we're growing shiitakes as well related to the root cellar. We actually fruited shiitake logs. We brought them in just to see what would happen from outside in the woods into the root cellar, stuck them in buckets of water, 5-gallon buckets for a couple weeks, and then they started to pin, like wanting to fruit, so we put them in the greenhouse, which we built recently. That's a shot of it. And now we're eating shiitake mushrooms, a number of them. They're not like summer flushes, but Miss Happiness is one strain that's just totally loving, very cold weather and fruiting really well. Wheatgrass is a great cold climate. You can grow great season extension crop, and that's what a lot of these systems are. Is really all about season extension. You can grow in a window in your house, anywhere, juice it, get a lot of green matter in your body. And one important principle, which is key to mention here near the end, is how easy it is for these systems to overshoot your capacity to manage them, right? You don't need to read this, but if you can see it, it's basically a huge list of stuff I should have gotten done in 2 days in the summer that I probably took 2 weeks to do. Right? There's a lot to do on a farm. So how do you do all this? That's a limiting factor. How do you keep up with these systems? So another principle emerged from there, which is always you can never work too smart. You can definitely work too hard. Working harder sometimes is key as well. Sometimes you just got to put the pedal down. We're learning, but we always can work smarter. I don't know how many hours I've spent looking for bits in my lifetime, but too many, till I thought just epoxy some magnets to the screw gun, so at least that will accrue to hours of free time or more productive time, in my life, which is a good thing. Ending on the medicinal end here, just real quick. Not as a downer, but this is Fukushima overlaid on one of our Vermont nuclear power plants, and here you have your very own ones nearby here, and there's these red dots unfortunately all over the world now in the northern hemisphere. So they're all the potential for toxification is kind of this at a more acute level than it's ever been, certainly, and so. It's not something to be scared of, but to live in a sober acknowledgement. So Fukushima, for one, personally, made me finally realize being fed would be one thing in the future. being healthy would be a whole nother. Because there's 104 Fukushima potentials just in the United States, and that only includes the power plants, right? And these are systems. Talk about overshoot management capacity. We don't have the capacity to keep up with, right? We've started an intergenerational project just by building them. Never mind, if we close them now, that's still intergenerational. So the health piece, for me personally, has come to the fore in a very rapid way in the last few years. And that's where medicine and really trying to have everything we're growing be medicine, at least in how it's processed or consumed, has become very central. Garlic is a great example of one of these things that's actually truly food medicine. It is food and it's medicine both. So it's hard to grow too much of. Greens, having a diet based in greens has been where we've been moving to a more generally loose type of paleo diet has been where we found the greatest health benefits personally. And it's really what just the land is needed. So we've kind of, I was vegan for many years. It's funny to be now so, it's odd to have such a paleo diet, but the land needed animals, so I kind of moved in that direction. It wasn't really my own choice. What's that?
Are those honeyberries?
Yep, these are honeyberries, shiitake mushrooms, duck eggs, cilantro, and spinach, and arugula, and this is mid-March. This is like a week from now last year. With a mild winter and a little cold frame protection, you can eat this way. Most of the year. This is what I call the endless arugula bed. It literally brews for 8 months of the year. So when people say, well, we only have a 4-month growing season, don't just take that as a given. We don't have a 4-month growing season. We have a 4-month growing season for a lot of stuff if you don't do a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
The honeyberry was also from March?
Yeah, we grow honeyberries.
Where? Like, how does it produce in March?
The honeyberry was frozen and is from the year before. Yes, we didn't eat fresh honeyberries. You're absolutely right. Good point. Honeyberries are the earliest plant to fruit for us. We get them in May, but yeah, not in March. Good call. The arugula was fruiting very early, as well as the other plants. And then here's a whole bunch of other nutrient-dense, like heavy phytochemical rich plants, which are really the biggest part of our response to toxicity that we're getting. Elderberry, seaberry, aronia, that's what these guys are right here. Korean bush cherry, blackberry, raspberry, that's more like the cucumber, right? That's kind of just for fun. It's pretty good for you, but it's nothing like the other rich phytochemical-laden plants. And then medicine that we're making here, this is what goes into syrups on the right. Or I'm seeing 2 slides, sorry. On this slide right here is syrup making in process. We got peaches. That's more of a fun crop, but we have been getting peaches with the way the climate's weirding out. Pretty heavy crops of peaches starting to come in. Seaberry, too much detail to go into right now, but probably our favorite fruit that we're growing, for sure. We're just putting as many of these in the ground as we have room for. The deer don't eat them. They're easy to take care of, and they fix nitrogen. So if we have too many, we'll cut them down. We'll grow something else. They're easy to propagate, too. So breakfast has started to look like this a lot in the last couple of years, and so we just don't seem to be getting the cold or flu. Eating like this, your health really does shift. This is seaberry juice, direct, 100%. It's probably like 50 to 100 therapeutic doses of seaberry in here. This is one of the only bioflavonoid-rich crops we can grow in this climate. Maybe the most rich in bioflavonoids. We can't grow citrus here for the most part, so we can grow northern citrus, or Vermont citrus, seaberry. Super cold hardy from like zone 3 to 5 or 6 at least. Other nutrient-dense foods that we're bringing to the table. Facilitating the vital force is something else where really I'm personally coming to realize through my relationship with this naturopathic doctor, and this is a beautiful reishi mushroom that we found just in the woods above our house. And Erica Koch, who this is, was able to make it into fantastic, all sorts of medicine we turned mushrooms into. And this is an example of something that you don't have to take time to do. I mean, this is just on a nightly walk. The forest around us is already producing this potent medicine. We dried most of this in the rafters. They dried within 3 days, and then you can put it in ball jars and store for years. Dried mushrooms are really hard to beat. And it's not surprising why mushrooms are at the center of culinary traditions in Northern Asia and Europe, and have been it for thousands of years. We just haven't caught on, as Paul Stamets talks about. We're very mycophobic. We're recovering from mycophobia, which may take hundreds of years. Another food medicine, right? Anything you can lacto-ferment is food and medicine at the same time. Ideally, whatever we take is some form of medicine. Kombucha, elderberry syrup, and hawthorn berry, sea berry syrup here. Shiitake mushrooms, garlic, all part of a daily taking in of the landscape that's been the last few years especially. So just want to kind of end on an idea about craftsmanship and working across multiple generations. I saw this bridge a handful of years ago and realized that some of the best craftsmanship, even though we don't get to see it mostly in the United States because we've thrown it out in the age of the machine, has made it here. This is a bridge in central New Hampshire that was made by hand before the fossil fuel age and will surely outlive the cheap fossil fuel age, when bridges we made in the 60s with all the resources in the world are falling down today. This will outlive that, those new bridges by many times, but it was made in a time when craftsmanship was a daily part of life. There was, people taking pride in their work in this level, to this degree. And I know it's just a bridge. What's it have to do with resiliency and growing food? But I think it actually has everything to do with it, because really all of this represents a type of craft and a type of intent to stay and work carefully with the systems around us, and skillfully. And realizing that if we really want our kids to not have to eat iPhones or try, right, and actually get persimmons to eat, have a living world that they inherit, not just a world of plastic and metal and machines breaking down. Have forests like this. This isn't a natural forest. This is a human-planted forest. If we want to plant those forests for the next 50 generations, this is a planted chestnut forest in Greece going down to the Mediterranean. All we have to do is get started. It's all possible, and it's all been possible for the whole time. Really, we've just done a lot of forgetting. These are nut pines that will bear for 400 years. A friend of mine grew above my friend of mine, Nico Rubin's place, and chestnuts also with some of our wine cap stropharia mushrooms. This could be the inheritance that we pass down. But only if we listen to all of this great stuff and actually start doing it. We don't just stay in the realm of talk, and we get our hands dirty and follow some of these principles and many others in our daily life, because no one else is going to establish these systems for us. For better or for worse, they're within us to establish. So it's ultimately empowering all of these living systems. For more, check us out on our website, wholesystems.com, or our permaculture course, and the book coming out soon. And love to take whatever time we have remaining to talk with folks about anything they want to chat about. So thanks.
The library closes about 8, so if you want to take one question, but Ben will be up here for otherwise, and if you could fold or stack your chairs as you're leaving would be great. To get Ben's book, it is being published by Chelsea Green, but also if you sign up on that list or stay in touch with the Whole Systems website, Ben and his team get a couple more bucks per purchase rather than Amazon or something else, so that's always appreciated. Thanks for coming, and if anyone has a question,
Yeah. What do sea berries taste like?